Good morning, students. I am Dr. Abhishek Kumar Singh, Tutor, Department of Physiology, ANMCH, Gaya. Today we are going to continue with the lecture which we were taking last time, that is muscle spindle and Golgi tendon. We talked about the structure of muscle spindle, and we also talked about that it includes nuclear bag fibers, nuclear chain fibers, and how they look. You have to draw a little diagram when you are asked to describe muscle spindle. This is the diagram. It shows the nuclear bag fiber, nuclear chain fibers, and the afferent and efferent supply to the muscle spindle. Then afferent innervations, we have seen that it is 1A and 2 fibers. 1A is also called A alpha fibers, and 2 fibers are also called as A beta fibers. There are 2 types of sensory endings, primary and secondary. We have talked all about this in the previous class. Then we have the efferent innervation. And then today we are going to talk about the mechanism of muscle contraction. How this muscle contraction is carried out by the muscle spindle. So first there is activation of gamma motor neuron, which causes contraction of the peripheral part of the muscle spindle, and this causes the stretching of the central part of the spindle. We have seen that there is a central part and the peripheral part. It is the central part which is responsible, which has receptors for the stretch. This causes distortion of the primary sensory endings which are located at the center of the nuclear bag fiber, which causes generation of action potential in the 1A afferent fibers, and this causes stimulation of the gamma motor neuron, which finally causes the muscle to contract. Then there was another thing other than the muscle spindle is Golgi tendon organ, about which we will also talk when we talk today about the spinal reflexes. Just you know that right now about this, that Golgi tendon organ is a receptor for a inverse stretch reflex. First we are going to talk about the stretch reflex in spinal reflexes, and then we will talk about the inverse stretch reflex, the receptor to which is the Golgi tendon organ, the diagram of which is shown in the PPT right now. We will talk in detail about this. So today we are going to talk about the spinal reflexes. How we define this spinal reflex? It's a stereotyped motor response to a specific stimulus like stretch of a muscle. It includes that spinal reflex has a reflex arc. You can see this. This is a reflex arc which is formed by receptors, afferents, interneuron, motor neuron, and the muscle. They all forms the part of a reflex arc. This plays an important role in control of posture as well as movements. Then reflexes which are integrated in spinal cord are stretch reflex, about which we are going to talk in detail today, also called as myotatic reflex. Then inverse stretch reflex, we have seen that there is a Golgi tendon organ which is the receptor for this inverse stretch reflex. Then there is withdrawal reflex, which is also called as flexion reflex. Then positive supporting reaction and negative supporting reactions, which are not normally observed in the normal subjects. So main thing on which we will highlight in today's class will be the stretch reflex, inverse stretch reflex, and few lines about withdrawal reflex or flexion reflex. First, and in detail, you get a short notes on the stretch reflex in your examinations, and you are also asked in Viva about the stretch reflex or myotatic reflex. It is defined as a reflex contraction of the muscle to stretch when a skeletal muscle with its intact nerve supply is stretched. So a nerve supply has to be intact in a skeletal muscle to carry out this stretch reflex, which causes a reflex contraction of muscle. Here the stimulus or the stimulation is the stretch of the muscle, and response is the contraction of that stretched muscle. It's a monosynaptic type of reflex, and we'll see why this is called as monosynaptic. This is a diagram which shows the reflex arc for this stretch reflex. It's of two types: phasic stretch reflex and a tonic stretch reflex. Phasic stretch reflex, here the stimulus is sudden stretch of a muscle, and here the reflex arc consists of a receptor, which is muscle spindle, about which we have studied in the previous class, and here the afferent is the 1A afferent fibers. What happens? The 1A afferent stimulates homonymous motor neuron, which causes contraction of the protagonist muscle, also called as agonist muscle, and it also as well causes inhibition of the heteronymous motor neuron, which causes the relaxation of the antagonist muscle. So two things are happening simultaneously. There is contraction of agonist muscle, and there is by stimulation of homonymous motor neuron, and by inhibition of the heteronymous motor neuron, there is relaxation of the antagonist muscle. So there is contraction of agonist muscle and relaxation of antagonist muscle, which is carried out by the 1A afferent stimulation. Here the function includes rapid limb movements. Example to that is a tendon reflex. So what happens? There is relaxation of the antagonist muscle, and which facilitates the movement which is caused by contraction of the agonist muscle. Such an innervation where there is relaxation of one group of muscle which cause facilitation of the another group of muscle is called reciprocal innervation, and such inhibition of the antagonist muscle is called as reciprocal inhibition. And this function, this phasic stretch reflex function, results in rapid limb movement like tendon reflex. Now clinical significance or applied part of this physiology is that exacerbation of a tendon reflex index is an index of increased gamma motor neuron discharge, while the depression of this tendon reflex means there is decreased gamma motor neuron activity. And this applied part is used when we study about upper motor neuron lesions. Again we have this diagram which is showing how there is a contraction of the agonist muscle and relaxation of the antagonist muscle. This is of thigh, which is shown here, the quadriceps femoris, which is the agonist muscle, while the hamstring muscles are the antagonist group of muscle. So there is contraction when this reflex arc, this stretch reflex arc works with an intact nerve supply. There is contraction of quadriceps femoris muscle, while there is relaxation of the hamstring muscle. And this causes the movement of the leg. The direction of the movement is a forward movement of the leg happens. Then the second type of stretch reflex other than the phasic stretch reflex is the tonic stretch reflex. This is same as the phasic stretch reflex, except that the receptors are both primary and secondary endings. Efferents are both 1A as well as 2 efferent fibers from the muscle spindle. In phasic stretch reflex, the efferent was 1A efferent fibers. Here, the efferents are both 1A as well as 2 efferent fibers from the muscle spindle. And The function here of the tonic stretch reflex is that it contributes to the muscle tone and is also important for the regulation of the posture. So it's contributing to the tone of the muscle and in the regulation of posture. Then we come to the inverse stretch reflex, about which we have seen in the beginning that there was stretch reflex or myotatic reflex, and then there was inverse stretch reflex, which receptors to that are the Golgi tendon organ. They are found in the tendons of the muscle. Here, the relaxation of the muscle in response to a strong stretch is called inverse stretch reflex. So when there is a strong stretch, this causes relaxation of muscle, and that's why it is called as inverse stretch reflex. And this plays a very important role in regulating the tension during the normal muscle activity. That is, when a muscle contracts, the force, that is the tendon when the muscle contracts, the force, the tension which developed within a muscle acts as a stimulus for its own relaxation. And that's why it is also called as autogenic inhibition. And it helps in monitoring the muscle force. It acts as a protective reflex. This inverse stretch reflex acts as a protective reflex to prevent muscle tear, muscle rupture. So basically, inverse stretch reflex provides a force feedback. And the receptor to that, we have seen the diagram, is the Golgi tendon organ, which is present or found in the tendon of the muscle. Then what is the effect of gamma motor neuron? In upper motor neuron lesion, we have seen what are upper motor neuron and what are lower motor neuron called. So in upper motor neuron lesions, increased gamma motor neuron discharge increases the reflex activity. The stretch reflex activity increases, and thus the muscle becomes hyperactive. This is due to increased phasic stretch reflex activity, and it also becomes hypertonic, and that is due to increased tonic stretch reflex activity. So both is happening here, that when there is an upper motor neuron lesion, the discharge increases the reflex activity and the muscle becomes hyperreactive as well as hypertonic. It becomes hyperreactive due to increased phasic stretch reflex activity, and it becomes hypertonic due to increased tonic reflex activity. Then we are talking so much about tone. So what you basically mean about muscle tone? How you define a muscle tone? It is basically the resistance of a muscle to stretch, and this is called as tone. So resistance which is provided, which is formed by the muscle in response to stretch, is the called muscle tone. And muscle can either be hypertonic or hypotonic. Hypertonic muscle is also called as spastic muscle. This is due to resistance to stretch is very high, and hypotonic is where there is decreased muscle tone. Here the discharge of gamma motor neuron is decreased. So in spite of hypertonic, the muscle becomes hypotonic. Then there is something called as clasp knife phenomena. You get an MCQ on this, you get bylaw questions on this phenomena. What do you mean by clasp knife phenomena, which is also called as lengthening reaction? It is basically a phenomena where a hypertonic muscle on stretching, as in upper motor neuron lesion, contracts, but if the stretch is continued, then the muscle relaxes. And this is called as clasp knife phenomena. That initially there is resistance to the muscle felt, but later with some time, with continued stretch, the muscle relaxes, and this is called as clasp knife phenomena. And why this happens? This is due to operation of stretch reflex as well as the inverse stretch reflex. Then we have clonus. What do you mean by clonus? It is again seen in upper motor neuron lesion. Here the regular rhythmic contraction of muscle subjected to a sudden and a maintained stretch. When the stretch is sudden and it is maintained, then this causes a regular rhythmic contraction of the muscle. You can see videos of a clonus of a muscle very commonly seen in ankle in YouTube or on net, on Google search. If you search for a video of an ankle clonus, you can nicely see what is being talked about here. That it is seen in upper motor neuron lesion and it results due to a sustained, maintained stretch, sudden and maintained stretch. Then there is rhythmic contraction of the muscle happening, and this is called as clonus. We will see the conditions in which this clonus can happen, clap-like phenomena can happen. The condition is usually upper motor neuron lesion resulting due to various causes. Then we have third type of spinal reflex, that is withdrawal reflex. Again, it is a protective kind of reflex. Here is a diagram for withdrawal reflex or a flexor withdrawal reflex. It is a protective reflex. Why it is called protective? Because it's here the receptors are nociceptors in the skin, tendon and muscle, and stimulus is a noxious or a painful stimulus. So when your legs step on a thorn or step on a hot surface or a very cold surface, there is a reflex withdrawal of your limb, there is a reflex withdrawal of your hand, and this is caused or produced by this flexor withdrawal reflex or the withdrawal reflex. So the withdrawal which is happening due to that noxious or painful stimulus brought by the nociceptors of the skin and tendon or muscle produce this protective reflex, also called as the withdrawal reflex. The whole arc of this withdrawal reflex, the reflex arc, is shown diagrammatically here. What we have just explained is written in this slide. That flexion is causing withdrawal of the body part from the source of the noxious stimulus, and extension of the opposite limb is meant to maintain the balance. So there is not only the flexion, there is also extension of the opposite limb to maintain the balance during this withdrawal reflex activity. Then we come to the last topic of this today's talk, is properties of spinal reflexes. Most of the properties named you are very much familiar when we were talking about the receptors and reflexes in the past. So first property is adequate stimulus. You are very well aware that the quality of stimulus that evokes a reflex response is called as an adequate stimulus. For example, stretch of a muscle is an adequate stimulus for a stretch reflex. Then convergence and divergence. We have already talked about these properties in the past. Then facilitation, like convergence, provide the physiological basis for facilitation when many afferent neurons projecting on a single motor neuron are stimulated simultaneously and the motor neuron is activated. So that is facilitation. And what is inhibition? Inhibition is that there is decrease in the activity of the target neuron. This is called inhibition. For example, reciprocal inhibition in the spinal cord. We have seen reciprocal inhibition when we are talking about spinal cord in the previous classes. And even the red cell inhibition of, that is the interneuron inhibition, which is also seen. Then we have this inhibition types, direct inhibitions, indirect inhibitions. Like direct inhibition is postsynaptic inhibition, indirect is a presynaptic inhibition, and we have talked all in very details in the past. then summation, and in summation we have spatial and temporal summation, and then occlusion. Here, when an afferent neuron is stimulated, it activates motor neuron that are present in its discharge zone, while it brings motor neuron to partially excited state that are present in the subliminal fringe, that is peripheral zone, and this is the phenomena of occlusion. That is when a discharge zone of a neighboring afferent neuron overlap, occlusion occurs. And when peripheral zone of a neighboring afferent neuron overlap, what happens? Facilitation occurs. And then the last is habituation and sensitization. What is habituation? Decreased response of a target neuron to an afferent stimulation when it is applied repeatedly. It is called habituation. And what is sensitization? Increased response. Habituation was decreased response of a target neuron, while sensitization is increased response of the target neuron to afferent stimulation when stimulus is applied repeatedly. So in habituation there is a decreased response, while in sensitization there is increased response to a stimulus when applied repeatedly. So this was all about the properties of the spinal reflexes, the stretch arc reflex, the inverse stretch reflex, the withdrawal stretch reflex. Stretch reflex was a monosynaptic reflex because there is single synapse happening, while the withdrawal reflex or the flexed withdrawal reflex is an example of a polysynaptic reflex where there is a multiple synapse happening to bring about this withdrawal of the limbs to a painful or a noxious stimulus. In the next class, we are going to start a very important topic, that is supraspinal control and the various descending pathways which are very important from your long answer point of view as well as from your short notes point. So from next class, we will be talking about the descending pathways in the central nervous system. Thank you.